So, the other day, Alex Jones had breaking news. DOGE had forced the U.S. government to admit to funding Al Qaeda, Taliban, whatever. And, the value that folks like Alex Jones provides US intelligentsia and military is every so often they'll point to something as if it's something new, just now uncovered, right? Or, something that somehow, only really occurs when a Democrat is president. However, U.S. flips who we're funding regularly, and thus recategorizing freedom fighters to terrorists at the drop of a hat. Obviously, U.S. interests change, so who we want to back changes. It's not morale, or morals. It's not about the right thing to do. It's just you know U.S. interests, which are not aligned with the U.S. That doesn't mean normal people. And it's kind of some examples. ISIS was created during Iraq War. The second one by collapsing the Ba'ath Party, which was by necessity the military and I think the government, and putting them in a prison camp with more radicalized people. All right. Um, Later, those people went on to form ICE and kind of followed up on all the networking they had done in prison with those Ba'ath Party members. Then there's Mujahideen. This was back, 1980s ish, kind of in there. We were funding them, the Mujahideen, during the time the USSR was in Afghanistan, while we were supplying elementary school books that would, for Afghan, children, that would say that a good Muslim, is required to kill any infidels in your country. Later the Taliban were the ones that fought them. Um, I believe they came from Pakistan, actually, kind of that movement over. But, and then Taliban's never really been anything more than a regional player, hardly even that. I mean, just very, very localized, unlike Al Qaeda or ISIS, for example. And then there's before the first Iraq War, Saddam or Saddam. Sorry, I have to think of Saddam Hussein in my mind to get the pronunciation right. But Saddam had asked the U.S. State Department what we thought about his disputes with Kuwait. At the time, I believe it was like border, Iraq was deciding that, they had some lands along the border or whatnot. The way I remember it, and I could be wrong, it wasn't like Iraq wanted all of Kuwait. But, like I said, I could misremember. But so the answer that we gave from the U.S. State Department was that we do not get involved with small regional issues. And so, then history, right? Um, and then after the Iraq War, U.S. was very coy about the weapons of mass destruction And often, we would focus on nuclear weapons of mass destruction. There are other types of weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons, for instance. Um, and so, you know, interestingly, years back, we had given Iraq chemical weapons, kind of with the understanding that they would be used on Iranian civilians. And what I remember is Donald Rumsfeld was actually one of the executives of that chemical company. And then, if you remember later on, he was the you know oh, Defense Department secretary during all of that with Iraq and all. And also, I mean, Rumsfeld, kind of had for a long time, kind of had a dream of, making the military, the U.S. military, much more nimble. That was before we had, I want to say, like JSOC or whatever. We didn't have small inner, department groups. We just had kind of the main deal. And I mean, like, and obviously, kind of to close this, there's reams of data which has been known, much of my life, which I'm not a spring chicken. And like a couple months ago, Senator Cotton had said, you know, I think just on his own. I mean, it's not like he was asked anything. That a violent dictator, but who is pro-American, they'll give us a reach around, whatever. They'll do what we want. Is better than some kind of a peaceful country that kind of is un-American. But un-American in that context only means like a country that decides, it's our oil, it's our iron, whatever. So we want market price. So obviously the U.S. companies wouldn't mind paying market price. That's not the way it works. We either get, you know, like sold pennies on the dollar, you know, like extraction, or that country is somehow anti-American, they're communist, what have you. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. Um, I mean, it seems kind of silly because to me it's always been a lot of this stuff's been kind of obvious. Um, but I think there are a lot of people who are kind of having to wonder, what is it that America is? What does America stand for? What are American interests? All this stuff, kind of like, earlier, the freedom fighters versus terrorists. It's all terms that, every country, every state uses to, achieve certain goals. And those goals are not the goals of the citizens. And there's a million different reasons, rationale, that people have had. why that is. But anyway, all right. So talk to you all later.